The colonel barely glanced her way, assuming she was just another support tech in a faded jumpsuit. Specialist Ramirez had a quiet reputation for catching the sort of hidden hydraulic leaks others missed, but nobody asked her opinion that morning. As the fighter jet rolled out, she paused, reviewing her logbook, triple-checking every line from her pre-flight inspection, a habit that set her apart from the rest. When the engine sputtered mid-flight and alarm sounded, she didn't hesitate. She climbed onto the wing, found the blocked hydraulic line, and rerouted it by hand before the jet lost lift. The pilot's visor reflected surprise before he keyed the mic. "Thanks, Specialist." Later, as the hangar settled into routine, Ramirez returned to her workbench, unnoticed by most. At 700, the hangar's overhead lights buzzed to life, signaling the start of the morning briefing. Ramirez moved with quiet purpose, collecting her checklist from the edge of her workbench. The paper was worn, its margins filled with extra steps she'd marked in blue ink, details she'd learned to add after years of catching what others missed. Around her, the rest of the crew gathered in loose circles, their voices rising and falling with easy jokes about last night's game. A socket wrench arced lazily between two mechanics, clattering once on the cart before being caught. Ramirez kept her eyes on her tools, aligning each one by size on the foam cutout. The official checklist was standard issue, printed in black and white, but Ramirez's version was layered with handwritten notes, reminders, questions, small warnings. She'd learned early on that the difference between a routine day and an emergency often came down to a single overlooked line. Her pen hovered over the last box, where she'd noted a faint residue on the port side hydraulic line. She paused, radio in hand, ready to report, but the channel was crowded with overlapping requests. After a few seconds, she clipped the radio back to her belt and turned toward the F-16 on jacks. The crew chief passed by, coffee in hand, clipboard under his arm, pages fluttering as he walked. His steps left a faint trail of oil on the concrete. He didn't pause at Ramirez's station. The other mechanics, clustered near the open hangar doors, glanced her way but said nothing. She focused on the landing gear strut, tracing her gloved fingers along the metal until she found a dark, dime-sized spot near a fitting. She paused, then reached for the correct wrench and isolated the saucier worn O-ring. Without waiting for instructions, she swapped it out and dropped the damaged part into a marked disposal bin. The replacement came from her own supply, not the communal bin. A pilot strode by, helmet under his arm, eyes scanning the room but never stopping on her. Ramirez returned to the aircraft, methodically checking each connection. Sunlight crept across the hangar floor as the first jet taxied out. She watched its movement for a moment, fingers twitching unconsciously, as if rehearsing adjustments she might need to make. Her uniform sleeve was bare, where a patch might have gone a small helicopter emblem, 2 stars above it. She'd removed it after her last deployment, not wanting to answer questions or invite attention. Those who noticed the empty Velcro strip rarely asked. When the F-16's engines spooled up for takeoff, Ramirez made a quick notation in the logbook. Port side actuator hesitation at high RPM. It blended in with the day's routine entries, except for a small question mark she added beside it. The logbooks were collected an hour later, stacked for review. Her note went unnoticed, lost among the routine signatures. By midday, 3 more jets would launch, each relying on the same system she'd flagged. In the background, Ramirez's quiet routine continued, her expertise hidden behind checklists and silence, even as her role stretched far beyond the assignment on her badge. Ramirez's name rarely appeared in the daily briefings, but around the hangar her reputation grew in quieter ways. Her personnel file listed her as avionics support, yet she'd quietly repaired countless hydraulic and fuel systems over the past weeks. Officially, her orders limited her to component-level maintenance, but over time, she'd patched procedures into unofficial routinist tasks that kept the jets flying, even if they fell outside her assigned scope. During lunch, a shift in the F-15's engine caught her attention. It was a subtle change, the kind of off-key note most missed, but she recognized it for what it was. Ramirez set her sandwich aside and walked the length of the hangar, reaching the aircraft before the diagnostic computer flagged anything unusual. She pressed her palm to the engine's access panel, feeling for vibration, then reached for her multimeter. With a fingertip on the bypass valve and her eyes on the gauges, she pinpointed the imbalance before the automated system finished its first cycle. Her note to the crew, rotor imbalance, port side, was taped to the instrument panel before the computer could print its first warning. Later, as she sorted inventory, a junior airman approached with a cracked bushing and uncertain hands. Ramirez didn't look up, but slid a modified socket wrench across the table. "Use this on the lower mounts first," she said, voice low. "You won't find it in the manual." The airman nodded, grateful for the tip. Inside her uniform collar, a ribbon was sewn flat, hidden from view. The blue and gold thread had faded over time, the edges stitched and restitched. She never mentioned it, and no one asked. When an avionics bay door jammed during pre-flight, Ramirez worked through her brake, using a straightened paperclip to reset a locked servo. She recalibrated the targeting system with a dental mirror and her multimeter, restoring the radar altimeter before the pilot noticed anything wrong. At the afternoon briefing, Senior Master Sergeant Holt dismissed her fuel pressure charts with a wave. "Specs show green," he said, turning his attention elsewhere. Ramirez stayed behind, rechecking each sample point by hand. Both her manual gauge and the digital readout showed a pressure drop, small, but enough to matter. She initialed the inspection sheet and added a small checkmark beside the fuel column, a quiet signal for anyone looking closely. Her paperwork at shift's end always ran longer than the others. While most submitted a single checklist, Ramirez's stack included extra torque values, temperature logs, and a hand-drawn diagram with 3 hydraulic lines circled in faint red pencil. The wing commander once found her old deployment records while sorting quarterly reports. 400 combat flight hours, emergency rotor swaps in sand-choked airfields, a transfer request with a single line. Needs ground assignment after Karbala medevac incident. Memories of desert storms and midnight repairs sometimes flickered behind her steady focus, though no one here knew of those nights. Down in the shop, Ramirez finished cleaning spark plugs as the late afternoon sun slanted across her workbench. She slid a new batch of inspection sheets into her folder, each one marked with her careful notes. Outside, a jet's engine spooled up, the pitch shifting in a way that made her pause, ears straining for the next sign, something just outside routine, waiting to be noticed. Inside the tower, tension pressed against the glass. The controllers were juggling arrivals, departures, and a string of minor alerts. Ramirez's radio warnings about the F-15's engine spike had gone mostly unheard. She didn't wait for permission. She left her workbench, crossed the tarmac, and climbed the tower stairs 2 at a time. By the time she reached the operations center, she was out of breath, but her words were clear. Viper 2-7, engine temperature out of range. Possible failure. The controllers glanced at her, uncertain. She wasn't cleared for the tower, and her presence drew uneasy looks, but no one stopped her. The rookie controller, Cho, scanned the radar, his hands hovering above the console. Ramirez stepped to the side window, eyes fixed on the sky. The tower chief was busy with routine traffic, his attention split between checklists and the stack of flight plans on his desk. Ramirez pressed forward. "You need to get them on final, now. Keep their speed up. Don't let them drop below 180 until short approach," she said, her voice steady but urgent. Cho hesitated. He knew the protocol, but he also knew Ramirez's reputation. He relayed her instructions, voice tight. "Viper 2-7, maintain speed. Vector's coming." The chief shot him a look, but Cho kept his headset on, eyes locked on the scope. Outside, the fire trucks rolled into place. The ground crew clustered by the fuel truck, uncertain where to move. The tower called out the emergency. "Single engine failure, Viper 2-7. Cleared straight in, runway 21 left." Ramirez watched the jet's approach, tracking its descent against the approach chart. She grabbed a grease pencil, marking new vectors and descent rates on a notepad, then handed it to Cho. "Tell them, bearing 210, descent, 800 feet per minute." He repeated it, his voice matching her urgency. The radio crackled. Mayday, mayday. Left engine fire warning. Gear indicator unreliable. The tower chief called for emergency services, voice clipped. Cho relayed Ramirez's numbers, overriding the earlier plan. The jet banked, lining up with the runway. In the tower, everyone held their breath. On the ground, Ramirez didn't wait for orders. She grabbed 2 hydraulic kits from the crash cart, handed one to a nearby airman, and headed for the exit. The tower's windows rattled as the jet came in low, the engine's uneven whine carrying across the field. Ground crews scrambled, but most froze, waiting for direction. Ramirez was already moving, her focus narrowing to the runway and the jet dropping toward it. The radio filled with clipped commands. Extinguishers to the left side. Clear the approach. Pilot, confirm gear down. But the decision-making felt slow, each second stretching. She reached the stairwell, already planning her next move. The tower's last transmission echoed behind her as she pushed out into the glare. Viper 2, 7, cleared to land. Emergency crews in position. The tension in the tower didn't break. Instead, everyone leaned closer to the glass, watching as the shadow of the aircraft grew larger, stretching across the tarmac. By the time Ramirez reached the ground, the jet was almost overhead, its left engine trailing a thin line of smoke. The fire trucks idled at the edge of the runway. She kept moving, eyes locked on the landing gear, ready for whatever happened next. The runway incident began as the jet descended, its uneven approach signaling trouble to anyone paying attention. Ramirez broke from the cluster of ground crew and moved quickly across the tarmac, her pace measured but urgent. The left engine sent a faint line of smoke into the air. As the aircraft lined up for landing, she could see the landing gear wasn't sitting right, just a subtle angle, but enough to mean something was wrong. She ignored the shouts from the safety officer at the boundary and crossed into the active zone, boots scattering gravel. The rest of the ground crew hesitated, unsure whether to follow or wait for orders. Ramirez didn't pause. She focused on the gear assembly, catching the glint of hydraulic fluid misting from the uplock mechanism. The leak was small, but the pattern told her what she needed to know. She'd seen failures like this before, hydraulic pressure lost just when the gear needed to lock down. The landing gear warning light flashed in the cockpit. The pilot kept the nose high, trusting the ground signals more than the instruments. Ramirez raised both arms, motioning for the pilot to hold the angle, buying a few more seconds for the gear to extend fully. The crew chief, finally recognizing the problem, echoed her motions from the sidelines. As the jet touched down, the right wheels hit first, the left gear still not fully deployed. Ramirez reached the aircraft as it rolled, moving alongside the left strut. Smoke curled off the brake assembly, heat shimmering in the air. She reached for the emergency release handle, a lever most would overlook, and pulled it down in a single motion. The sound was immediately a heavy metallic shift, as the uplock disengaged and the struts settled into place. The aircraft steadied, rolling straight as the brakes caught and the engines powered down. Fire crews moved in, dousing the brakes before the heat could ignite the leaking hydraulic fluid. The air around the gear filled with the sharp smell of burnt rubber and hot metal. The pilot emerged from the cockpit, helmet in hand, scanning the tarmac until his eyes found Ramirez. He gave a single, silent nod and acknowledgement that needed no words. Maintenance teams surrounded the jet, already running diagnostics. Ramirez stepped back, wiping fluid from her gloves, her focus already shifting to the next task. The commotion faded as the emergency passed, leaving only the faint echo of the jet's landing and the quiet recognition exchanged across the runway. By the time the incident reports began and questions made their way through official channels, Ramirez had returned to her workbench, tools laid out in careful order. The details of what happened on the runway would filter through the base slowly, one line in a pilot's statement, a note in a maintenance log, a quiet conversation in the hangar. For now, the only record was the nod from the pilot and the memory of a decisive act witnessed by those who understood what it meant. After the runway cleared, the official paperwork began. The pilot's report barely mentioned an unnamed technician in the fine print. No formal citation followed, no press release circulated. Ramirez started her next shift at 600, initialing the new safety waiver on the clipboard without a word. The day's tasks included a faulty fuel gauge and a stubborn relay her tool marks in the maintenance logs as precise as ever, each wrench returned to its slot, each note in her careful script. Behind closed doors, 3 generals reviewed the incident data, black box readouts scrolling across a screen. The base commander paused over a personnel file, flipping through old records. A faded evaluation surfaced, noting exceptional composure under pressure, dated years before. No one discussed the gap between her listed assignment and her actual skills, though a few glances lingered longer on her name. When the debrief wrapped, the same commander who had reprimanded her for crossing the runway quietly kept her fixes and procedures under separate cover, integrating them across the wing. The new emergency gear checklist, now laminated, appeared in the tower and in crew ready rooms, her handwritten notes transcribed into official font. No signature marked the bottom, just a reference to the incident. Word spread quickly among the maintenance teams. The crew chief began leaving his coffee on her bench before meetings, a small gesture, but understood by those who worked alongside her. Reporters circled, but she refused every request, turning back to her work as if nothing unusual had happened. The public affairs office moved on. Junior mechanics started adopting her diagnostic habits, copying the way she logged discrepancies or flagged potential failures. A few began to linger near her bench during breaks, watching how she organized her tools, though none asked direct questions. The crew chief's coffee remained on her workbench, a quiet sign of respect. At the next safety stand down, the commander played selected tower recordings. Ramirez sat at the back, uniform pressed, hands folded. The footage paused on her sprint across the tarmac, then cut to a diagram of the landing gear fix. The training officer spoke of new lessons learned, never naming her. Afterward, schedules shifted. Her shifts now overlapped with high-priority flight preparations. Officers and aides began to appear near her station, observing in silence, taking notes on her methods. The revised emergency protocols entered the permanent record with a simple line: Field tested resolution. No ceremony marked the change, no plaque went up. Later, as the sun angled across the hangar, Ramirez ate her lunch at her usual spot, jotting calculations on a sandwich wrapper, details folded into a manual, uncredited. The upgraded hydraulic kits arrived quietly, each one fitted with a lever matching the one she'd used. Supply clerks noted the change came from higher up, and crew chiefs found the correct O-rings already stocked. By the time quarterly inspection rolled around, even senior NCOs paused near Hangar 2. No one saluted, but their eyes tracked the neat workbench set apart from the rest. Routine settled back in, but something had shifted. When the next call came, a warning from the refueling line, crew chiefs glanced toward her corner of the hangar before moving. Ramirez was already stepping out, repair kit in hand, ready for whatever came next. Most days began the same way. Ramirez arrived before sunrise, her uniform pressed, boots set out the night before. The hangar lights flickered on overhead as she crossed the concrete, her steps unhurried, her place at the back workbench unchanged. This morning, a few mechanics paused mid-conversation when she entered, their eyes following her as she set her kit down. The checklist on her bench looked familiar, but now the margins were crowded with notes in different handwriting. Where she once added quiet reminders and extra inspection steps alone, now nearly every logbook on the officer's desk carried similar marks. The crew chief no longer circled these additions in red. Instead, he left them as they were, a silent acknowledgement that something had shifted. A junior airman approached, holding a leak report. He didn't hesitate or wait for her to look up. "Specialist Ramirez, could you check my seal assessment on Bay 4? She took the form, marked 3 neat checks beside the diagram, and handed it back. The airman nodded and walked off, skipping the supervisor's desk entirely. The chain of command remained on paper. Senior Master Sergeant Holt still signed off on repairs, and the maintenance officer approved each flight. But when a warning light flashed during pre-flight, more than one head turned toward Ramirez's bench before checking the chief's office. The dynamic was unspoken. Orders still came from above, but trust in her judgment ran beneath the surface. Later, The F-16 pilot from the emergency passed her station. His new rank stitched above the pocket. He paused just long enough to offer a nod gesture, usually reserved for those further up the hierarchy. Ramirez didn't respond, wiping oil from a caliper, her attention fixed on the next task. She rebuilt a hydraulic line she'd patched weeks earlier. The replacement seals in the kit now matched her improvised fix, and the repair manual supplement included her torque specs, copied from her old notes. By midday, when a vibration in engine test cell 3 matched the warning signs she'd once flagged, 3 other mechanics checked their readings twice before signing off. The habit of caution had spread. Up in the command deck, 2 officers watched from behind tinted glass. They spoke in low voices, but their attention never left the floor as Ramirez packed her tools, each piece returned to its slot with practiced care. As the day wound down, a supply clerk dropped off a new hydraulic tester. It matched the one Ramirez had modified herself months before, right down to the notched collar. She accepted it without a word, adding it to her kit between the wrenches. Around her, the crew fell into a rhythm tools organized, checklists annotated, eyes scanning for details they might have missed in the past. By dawn, every crew checked their gauges with her shorthand in mind before signing off. Routine held, but the atmosphere had changed. Respect moved quietly through the ranks, settling in gestures and habits more than words. Ramirez finished her shift as she always did, returning each tool to its place, logbook closed and tucked away. She stepped out into the fading light, the hangar behind her humming with the low voices of mechanics comparing notes. Inside, a new group gathered near her bench, waiting for the next lesson, their focus steady as the day's calm gave way to the possibility of something new. Legacy in a place like Hangar 2 rarely comes with speeches or ceremonies. The plaque above Bay 3 appeared without notice, its edges already polished by the touch of passing hands. No rank, no combat record, just a name and the years served. Mechanics paused there on their way to the flight line, some tracing the letters with a fingertip before moving on. It became a habit, a silent gesture that grounded the day. Ramirez's presence lingered in the routines more than in conversation. In every hangar, mechanics followed her order of checks without question. The laminated sheets clipped to each toolbox now matched her handwriting, torque values, and red line priorities, copied exactly. When a new checklist rolled out, the origin was left blank. No one needed to ask whose methods they were. A junior airman, searching for a missing socket, found the small case tucked behind Ramirez's toolbox Purple Heart, Air Medal, a distinguished flying cross. The ribbons were faded, the citations unsigned. He closed the box and said nothing. Afterward, he watched her more closely, noticing how she paused before each takeoff, how she checked the same points on every jet, how others had started to mirror her habits. Media requests kept arriving at public affairs, but the answer never changed. Ramirez declined interviews, turned down photo requests, and redirected anyone who asked about her record. The base historian never got past the hangar doors. Even the crew chief's quiet gesture coffee left on her bench each morning went unremarked, but never missed. When the F-35's engine display flickered with a pressure warning, the ready crew didn't wait for orders. Ramirez moved first, and 6 junior specialists fell in behind her, tools in hand. No one spoke. They just followed, knowing she would see what others missed. By the time they reached the aircraft, the issue was already half solved. The officer on duty lowered his radio, watching the group work in practiced silence. The new digital checklist system carried her notes in every field, even as the rollout memo left her name off. The changes spread triple checks on fuel lines, annotated logbooks, specialty tools packed without requisition. There were no speeches, no award ceremonies, just a shift in how things were done. The shadow of her workbench stretched longer each evening. On her last week, nothing marked her coming departure. She trained new classes, fixed what still needed fixing, and left the hangar as quietly as she'd entered it years before. The only sign was the way every head turned when a jet taxied out, eyes following the aircraft until it cleared the field. She never asked to be seen, only to keep jets flying, and now every flight carries a bit of her quiet expertise. For every Ramirez, there are thousands more whose names never make it into headlines or history books. Like her, many serve in silence's killed hands guiding missions, steady judgment shaping outcomes, rarely seeking recognition. Their stories don't fill official reports, but their work shapes every success that follows. If you know someone like this, a modern-day Ramirez, let us know in the comments. Tell us who inspires you, and subscribe for more stories of real military women who broke barriers. Your stories help ensure these contributions aren't forgotten. As one ground crew member later described in a radio log, her silhouette crossed the tarmac at dawn, the first jets lifting into the sky, their paths still guided by her shadow.